Have you seen so many speakers on the stage at the same time? 那个罗伯 do you want to get up here? It's okay. Okay, 好 Yeah. So we have 45 minutes, and it's called round table. Jim just criticized me yesterday. You don't even have a round table. What do you call round table? So, so now we really have the round table. I think that the reason we have this section, we like to go deeper, discuss, to share, or kind of exchange the idea. They still have some question may not be answered, and I like maybe I just kind of list some of terminology. And first one, I would like to give to microphone to James Robson. The first one, I think the like a sentient being. It came out. That's very interesting. How can we define sentient being from Buddhism and also from science? And of course, we talk about karma. We also talk about embryo. And I think this is also to do with abortion. What's the definition? But I think Mi Bao Fa Shi is not here. Before lunch, I was trying to respond to him, but I gave the chance to the audience. Well, because in Buddhism, yes, we keep teaching so-called no beginning and no end. But this could be a paradox, because just like in Christianity, you say God is the first cause, so you don't have to answer. But maybe when I was young, I was keep asking, who is the grandmom of God? Who give birth of God? So it's really hard just to say, okay, this is the first cause. And in Buddhism, we just say, no beginning, no ending. So all kinds of this question, I think it's going to, of course, it's going to challenge Buddhism a lot. Okay, I should shut up and give it to.
So, you've already asked the question about sentience, so I think we should listen to the. I have actually a different question, so I think we should let other people respond to. You've raised the question, so don't waste time.
I think that for sentient being, just a moment. In Sun, have you mentioned that the sentient being, is that like a 36 week and start to feel pain? So that's the definition for sentient being?
It's not the definition for sentient being, because that's just for human fetuses.
Oh.
Yeah, so it's not to start around that time, the ability to feel pain. Over lunch, we're talking a little bit more about the idea of pain, and what I think is a little bit, to me, more interesting morally is the idea of suffering. And suffering and pain, to me, are not the same, because you can be in pain but not suffering. There are people who like to run marathons, and they're in pain the whole time, and they love it. They're very happy. In Boston Marathon, they're smiling the whole time. Right. People can be in a great deal of suffering but not feel pain if you're paralyzed, right, and you're unable to live your life plans. You are in great suffering. So I think suffering is maybe the more useful idea, not so much pain.
Yeah. So suffering is more mental?
No. I mean, the interesting thing within the Buddhist tradition is that, so pain is just one form of suffering. The other form is pleasure. In other words, pain will remain painful until you do something to stop it. Pleasure will turn to pain unless you do something to stop it, according to the Buddhist tradition. And so it's interesting, we've talked about pain but not pleasure so much as a part of suffering. So I think that's a really, really important point to qualify. Yeah.
Buddhism talks about sensation of
positive,
pleasant,
negative, neutral.
And neutral.
The thing that I find slightly puzzling is that a lot of people seem to know what the focus of the suffering or the pain is. I mean, so it's the person running the marathon, or it's the bundle of cells and has it developed into a nervous system. But I thought Dr. Takahashi's stories about the relationship of the prospective parents to the embryos was interesting because it was not the embryo's suffering that was being talked about. It was the context in which the relationships mattered. So I think that the point about and Venerable Yifar, you made the point that karma is not just individual, it can be collective as well. But throughout the conference so far, I think there's been a sort of under stress on when or how the collective emotions, understandings, achievements, non-achievements relate to the individual. And I'd be interested to hear more about what people think about that dimension of things.
I could add something. Oh, sorry. I was thinking about, as far as sentience and pain versus suffering, I was also thinking about some of the real research I've been doing is actually on sexual violence in Buddhism, not abortion. So I do have a large kind of collection of data about that. And one of the things that became very clear is that a lot of the survivors, their process of going through, their understanding of what they experienced as a form of suffering took place over this really long period of time. And also that they experienced it not only kind of through memory and through thoughts and through cognition and thinking about it, or even only through emotions, but they all somatized at some point or another. So they all, and it was often at just the moment when they were starting to kind of break out of what was a abusive situation and started to feel the need to do that, but couldn't actually do it. They couldn't cognize it. They couldn't fully realize that mentally or intellectually, but their body did it for them, which is, I'm not a trauma expert, but I think it's fairly typical. So that idea of suffering being in the body in a way that's not really to do with memory, thinking, it's being expressed physically, so that, they would have rashes, they would have aches and pains, not be able to eat, things like that. And that's when a lot of them realized, like, oh, this is really a bad situation. Like, this is not what I'm telling myself it is, which is, for my enlightenment or for my progress, this thing I'm experiencing, it's actually really bad for me. It was through the body.
I think that this also have the issue about the definition of killing. Because in Buddhism, that, basically the precept, no killing, no stealing, no sexual misconduct. So the killing, how can we define whether if the fetus has are not sentient before, which I just said before, 36, then if you have an abortion, it's not like then that means no killing, because that is not sentient being. This will be also the issue. Okay, James, shake a hand. Shake a head. Okay, James.
So that sort of question, I don't know, for some reason it took me straight to things about Sri Lanka and wars there and the definition of peoples as non-people, therefore killing is okay. The traditional, one of the common justifications in Buddhism for war is that you're not really killing people. And there's sort of an analogy here when we're talking about sentience in embryos. And if they're not sentient, they're not people, therefore it's not killing, is what I heard you say. And so it just sort of made me jump to that other place where that same rationale in Buddhism is used. And I think that both the science that we've been hearing today, as well as I think our general understanding of people, that definition doesn't wash. It doesn't hold a lot of water for us, I think.
But we still have to figure out when we're killing and when we're not, right?
Yeah, okay, so it's complicated. Thank you, everybody, for making it more complicated. It's better that way.
Okay, I think that this is a very good question. I'd like to raise some of my observation from my study and a lot of my life experience. Okay, according to the Buddhism, one of the most important, the sutra, 八事规矩颂, is the 8 conscious that they have some rule. he mentioned about all ours, whatever is suffering or any memory or pain is from like the eighth consciousness, like a storage. So when we meet some, a condition, the seed comes in front of us, and our body's operation started to, remember some pain or some happy. I'm not science, so I'm trying to asking and learn from all the science and research here. How about the sutra said, this kind of like a computer, you have something on the screen because you access the some storage, the memory before. So that is the whole 八四规矩颂. A conscious is this sutra core. So from the science or your research point of view, would you like to share with us? This is karma as well.
Make some conclusion about cell and no? Anyone want to make a because he has a different question. Yeah. So I was thinking if we can somehow kind of make a conclusion, not really. It's what is really the definition of sentient being? In Buddhism, we kind of tend to talk about plants and animal. All the animal, of course, include deity, spirit, isn't it? So, so then it looks like a non-plants rock. It will call sentient being. But in science, how are you going to define them? Yeah, Robert.
Well, I was just going to say we have to also, from Buddhist point of view, aren't the moisture-born, yes, they're sentient beings, right?
Yes.
And so, and
yes,
and those sentient beings are not, well, in theory, they should be valued as much as anything else. And in that case, wouldn't the one-cell, the one-celled embryo be valued as much as anything else?
Just like the moisture.
Yeah.
You can tell
Yeah.
it's also like a moisture. So that's why I was saying because today someone talked about potentiality, potential, even though may not, it's a life, but there was a potentiality to become alive.
Can I add something to this? It seems to me that question, that the definitional question is, to echo Jamie here, is a question of exclusion. The project is to figure out what's not in the category, right? To delimit it so that everything that sort of falls outside of the category is fair game for whatever instrumentalization you would want to employ, which of course is a nice move when you want to kill some people or whatever. And there have been various moments where there's discussion of, building a karma meter. Can we measure karma, etc.? But it does seem to me that there's a logical chain that if one wants to connect karma and conduct to some definition of sentience and non-sentience, and then one reduces that down to some set of defining attributes that is somehow connected to pain or whatever basic, sort of physiological capacities one pegs that definition. Pretty soon you get yourself to a kind of biochemical painometer that is in effect a karma-ometer, is it not? And the whole project then becomes a project of the occlusion of precisely the kinds of relationality that Sheila was pointing to in Dr. Takahashi's talk, where you would, by constructing your definition, exclude out of hand those entities that are part of a relational picture that is imbued with significance in her story, and you just don't see it because your project was to define away whatever you didn't have to think about too much. So it struck me as quite a strange thing in the conversations today in particular, this move towards drawing things down to a kind of definitional essence that is really a kind of project of simplification and an anti-relational project whose ethical character is to ask, what do we not have to worry about, as opposed to what are the obligations, what are the aspirations, the ethical aspirations that should orient us as subjects to the world.
I'll just point out that David Gunkel in the West has made the argument that our relationship to machines is also relational, and that it doesn't make any difference whether a machine actually suffers or not. If we think it suffers, then that's all that matters. I'm not sure that's a very satisfying answer, and I don't think it's satisfying in bioethics either, to just say, if your child thinks that its doll is suffering, then that's all that matters, and therefore the doll has some kind of special significance. I still think we need to figure out what the characteristics are of things that have moral status.
So, I mean, if I could turn it around to a question, I mean, so your message at the end of your talk about we're all connected is moving the locus of pain and suffering arguably away from the individual and into the collective of being connected. So when you were talking about the later rediscovery of trauma, you stayed with the individual and the individual's development. But I was thinking of a whole range of Holocaust, post-Holocaust psychology, where the trauma discovery has been passed down from one generation to another. So the children and grandchildren are carrying that memory. And, you know, it's an interesting question. I mean, on the whole, in Western thinking, any kind of enlarging of the sphere of sympathy is considered to be progressive. That if you can feel the pain of another, or you can recognize that that the recognition of pain itself is a kind of antidote to the pain itself, because it breeds empathy and compassion. So I think that there's a kind of latent tension between the sort of reductionism that Ben was describing when you focus on the pain itself, and the non-reductionism if you follow instead the chain of compassion and the chain of connectedness. So my question is, can you do the one thing without the other? And is the dynamic of the religion rather not to connect the pain and the response to it, and thereby, to some extent, transcend this focus on the individual that I've been finding, you know, in a somewhat pronounced way through the conversation thus far.
May I have some response?
Yeah.
Okay. I would like to respond from two respects. One is about pain and suffering. For pain, we would like to link to physical. Like when I hit you, you feel pain. But suffering is about emotional. So in cancer, we say that total pain includes spiritual. So when you love one thing too much, you love someone too much, but you cannot get her or him, you will feel suffering. That is not a pain from I hit you, but because I cannot get you. That kind of suffering, the deep difference. So the Buddhism told suffering is not only physical, but include when we climb something too much, but we cannot get it. Just like we want to live longer, we don't want to lose our family, we don't want to lose something. That's kind of suffering. That's different from the pain and suffering. And another one I want to respond is that the Ifa mentioned that the birds are not only human beings or women birds, but in which essential level they have the consciousness, they will feel pain. Just like, do we think like a mosquito or cockroach have the pain sensation? We acknowledge that our dog, our puppies, horse, they can respond to us. They have the sensation. That's our experience. So in Buddhism, the different energy level of the living being, from my understanding, just like I think the different energy level make the six realms of the reincarnation. But by which stage we can definitely know the embryonic cell have the sensation of pain or suffering. Probably the biologists or some scholars can make an experiment when we touch the cell, if the cell shrinkage, have some response, and we make that time say, oh, they have sensation of pain. But we cannot make sure that they have the consciousness. These two respects, I want to make the response.
Thank you. I wanted to add a few more complications to what Ben said. I agree with what he said, but so one philosophical question I have is, with sentience, is that something that you would view as a matter of degree or all or nothing? If it's a matter of degree, then you have degrees of like considerability. Is the sentience of a fly less than, let's say, you and I? So there's a puzzle of, is it a matter of degree, and then so you rank based on degree. To me, sentience is a part of a type of consciousness, right? So studies show that human beings, at least, can have sensory perception without being aware of it, which is a fascinating thing. You can have a lesion in your brain, and you're blind to like one side of your body. So you'll visually see something, but you report that you don't see anything. And then when the doctor asks you questions about it, you actually answer far above random. So it means that you're not aware that you have the input, but you're able to say like what color you just saw. You can flash a number very, very quickly, so quickly that you don't think you saw anything. But then they ask you, well, what was the number? And it's above random. So there's that kind of like, you're not aware, but the mechanism's working somehow in the brain. Then there's sentience where like you're aware of the sensation or the experience. And then there's another layer, which is like self-consciousness, which is more like I'm aware of myself as a being, and I have a future. So there are many, many different levels to this. And so not only in sentience, there could be maybe different degrees of it, but also maybe different in the ladder of the complexity of consciousness. So that was one very interesting to me complication. The other one is there's a temptation, I think, for many people to think that what makes us uniquely human, what makes us worthy of, or anything worthy of moral respect, is going to be one property. And it's a unique property. It's like the philosophical tradition of what makes human beings different from animals and special, reason. Well, the problem with the one property view is that you're going to have probably other members of the group that don't have that. And so what about, demented people? What about, severely mentally handicapped people, newborns? They suddenly are not protected. And there's a danger to having just one criterion, because there's always somebody who lacks it. So my personal approach is more of not the classical set where everything has to have those properties and just those properties, but what we call in mathematics a fuzzy set. So there's sufficient enough, you have enough there, and we're granted the status. And that, I think, is a very interesting way to go. In biology, many categories are fuzzy set categories, they're not classical set. But the problem with the fuzzy set view is that then the question is, well, how much is enough? What's sufficient enough? But you get also, in that case, varying degrees of status. But I think there are many other options available for people to think about, and I just want to raise those points. Thanks.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's true in the Buddhist tradition, right? It's a singular thing. That what distinguishes humans from animals is intentionality. So there's a kind of sentience there, but they lack intention. So then can't affect karma. So only as a human can you do that. The question that I wanted to ask, sorry, came up in the this final panel here. I think it raised a much larger question about the relationship between, say, the state and law, certain practices, and then also the role of Buddhism within that. And so Professor Takahashi's talk got me thinking back to some of the work on issues of abortion in Japan too, and the role of the Buddhist Sangha in that. So abortion was legalized in Japan in 1948, not until 1973 in the U.S. Yet it took until 1999, if I'm not mistaken, until the birth control pill was legalized in Japan. It took 34 years to go through the regulatory process. But when Viagra was introduced in 1998, it was approved within 6 months. So the state has played a huge role in the kinds of biological issues that are putting people, and particularly women, into positions that are not of their own real choice, but are actually forced into a kind of a position of having to do things that then have a moral, ethical, or even issues of guilt and shame that come with that. So you mentioned the kuyo, the memorialization or memorial services. And so this is huge in Japan. It may have actually saved Buddhist temples in Japan by performing the mizuko kuyo for, I hadn't known about the ones for embryos that are discarded, but definitely for aborted fetuses. That, I mean, it's everywhere in Japan, and it probably saved many rural temples. So the question is, so you could say, oh, that's really an ethical thing. The Buddhists are doing redressive rituals to help women with the grief of having only had the option of abortion. On the other hand, you could say the Buddhists should have fought against the lobby of the clinics that were blocking birth control pill. And so how were they complicit in this because they were benefiting from that kind of those ritual services? So where does Buddhism enter into pushing the state legal codes to be changed versus being only in a passive position of coming in after the fact and dealing with a problem that's been created not at the choice of the individual, but due to a kind of legal limitations? So
I don't know if I have anything to add to that. I agree that they do definitely have a conflict of interest, I think, the Buddhist temples, because it is so profitable. They do have quite a conflict of interest, I think, because it is quite profitable to have this mizuko kuyo to alleviate the guilt of having an abortion or disposing embryos. But the state have not taken any kind of actions for that. Yeah, we're still very much behind in terms of even determining what criteria you can have an abortion for, like if it's for women's reasons or if it's for health reasons, financial reasons, because of rape. We have very limited criteria, but yet the reality is that people are just having abortion because they need to. But on the surface, there's only like 2 reasons why you can have an abortion, which is women's health reasons and also financial reasons. Yeah, so it's...
I have a slightly different response to your question, James. So at the risk of previewing things that I'll say in the wrap-up tomorrow, I mean, I don't think that the way you turned the question after the very interesting observation was necessarily the direction I would go. So not what is the obligation of Buddhism. I think Buddhism is way, way too complicated a thing to suddenly label one obligation onto it anyway, because, you know, on this panel already we have experts in different styles and forms of Buddhism, so I don't think it's a singular religion with a singular set of obligations in a complicated situation. I think that the kind of comparative observation you're calling attention to leads us back into the more foundational moral issues, like what do we learn from these contradictions about the ways in which community is built and people are labeled as falling inside or outside the moral community. I think it's fine to take biology and say that all of this is focusing somehow on the very earliest stages of life, but I don't think that's right. I think that throughout all stages of life, we're constantly creating categories of who is inside and who is outside and who belongs and who doesn't belong. I mean, in this particular year of 2025, which is so filled with war and violence, we're seeing a lot of different moves about who it's okay to drop bombs on. And, you know, just earlier today I was reading an article that said, is it international law that's failing or is it states that are failing? And that's a weird distinction, right? Because international law was made on the premise that there are such things as states. So I think that looking at where a religious lobby or a religious group has taken a position or not, to defend what? I mean, to defend what kinds of inclusion or exclusion, that I think is the kind of moment of reflexivity for the religious tradition itself, and to ask, was our understanding of something like sentience or something like compassion or something like caring or stewardship or whatever it is adequate to the task at hand? And I think if we're going to be favoring something called enlightenment, that is a process we can never let up on, because we have to keep coming back to it and asking, what were the rights and wrongs here? And from generation to generation, we might have very different answers to that.
Yeah, I didn't mean to, I certainly wasn't trying to unify. In fact, I've been trying to push that one of the problems, I think, for the Buddhologists at this conference is in responding to all the folks working in science, is that it's impossible for us to unify any singular position of on any answer. We would have to go through a whole range of things. But the interesting thing in Japan is that every Buddhist tradition of every stripe has gotten into the game of the Mizuko Kuyo. And I was just thinking, what is the role of Buddhism as it's having to confront these bioengineering new issues that are arising? So we have, Buddhist temples creating robot monks. We have Buddhist temple, one in Japan, sending the first Buddhist temple into outer space, probably later this year, with a reliquary in it. Why couldn't they do something like, if the real issue comes down to $500 to preserve embryos, why couldn't, Buddhist temples preserve the ashes of the dead? Why not build a way to preserve embryos for those who need it? That would be an act of compassion. So in other words, how to get the Sangha to think about different ways of engaging with some of these, the issues that have come up due to these modern technologies that are developing and adapt.
Can I ask a question about, is that like is that like in Japan, many women, have an abortion, but not really go to, well, you have all this musical, but but you have all this musical worship. So that means they worship for abort child, no? Yeah. So my point is like it looks like in Japan, this abortion is kind of more like a personal level. Yes. But in United States, live up to the Supreme Court and then make a public and accuse the people if they have abortion like a criminal. And my observation is right? Or we could come. Sorry.
I wish that.
Well, just this is on this. I want to go back to James for a minute. But as far as Mizuku Kuyo goes, it's not just for abortions; it's also for miscarriages.
Right.
And so that makes it that makes a difference.
Not that different, really. There's overlap between miscarriage and abortion. There, in a sense, sometimes it's not known to anyone but the woman herself which one it is. And sometimes, I think that for women, there's a similar sense of grief and loss. So there's a lot of ways in which, and going back to what I was saying about this, very early Buddhist tradition, which is actually calling early abortion, we might say a deliberate intervention in pregnancy, calling it restarting menses, which is like a really old tradition in, I think, lots of places in the world. It's a specialty of midwives to do that. So I think anyway, yeah.
I'm just saying that...
I don't think it's like a huge moral difference, I would argue.
Okay, but I'm just saying that if I was was assuming that all these Mizuko Kuyo, that the prevalence of Mizuko Kuyo meant that there were many abortions. But it doesn't necessarily, because some of them are not abortions. And to go back on a little picky point with James, you are suggesting that animals don't have volition?
No, I think this is usually the description, right, for animals on the cycle of rebirth, of not being able to affect their karma due to lack of intentionality.
Except that one reason that it's bad to be reborn as an animal is that you're going to be doing bad things and creating more karma. And therefore, there's volition involved. No?
I don't know. Different there's going to be different positions
Different
on this, I think.
strokes for
Actually,
different
just like they
things.
were with Ife's point about, the sentience of rocks and trees and all of that. Not every part of the tradition is going to accept that. Some do, and we'll push hard for that. So,
Robert, can I ask, you earlier were talking about the moisture-borne, so bacteria, insects, other kinds of creatures, and I think your question was implying, why don't Buddhists act like Jains, right? Jainism takes the violence.
Yeah, I was thinking of Jainism.
Yeah, they take that kind of violence very seriously, morally, and I've never seen a Buddhist society that locked up people for eating meat or anything like that.
I mean, obviously, there are doctrines are not consistent. But yes, that's exactly what I was thinking of, was with the monks who sweep the ground so that they aren't, and strain the water so they're not killing any of the invisible
and wear a
things.
mask.
And wear masks, like most of Japan.
And you know what? When Devadatta asked the Buddha to be a vegetarian, the Buddha said no. Remember? Yeah, that's in the Vinaya. Many people just assume that Buddhists have to be a vegetarian. But if you look at the Vinaya, you have all the fish and meat. And during the time of the Buddha, that even Devadatta, his cousin, come to the Buddha and say, hey, we should be more like a giant, and the Buddha said no. So I just want to kind of bring this up. Of course, I mean, if you look at in Chinese Buddhism, the vegetarianism is very popular, also because effect by Emperor Wu and also Confucius idea, and also China has the cultural, like a stop slaughter in certain day. So all kinds of cultural effect, and also because Emperor Wu, and he later he just issued the decree to prohibit monks and nuns in China now have to be a vegetarian and prohibit from wine drinking as well. And if you look at the document, the monk in Vinaya, like a study Vinaya, they against it. They say, well, we have to follow the Buddha. We should not be a vegetarian. Of course, at the end, it was, whoever the favor, emperor's favor will win. The side on the emperor's favor will win. I just kind of. Okay, so we have 6 minutes. We have 6 minutes left. Anyone want to raise a new issue? Maybe.
I have one I'd love to hear. Or go ahead, Amy. I've spoken enough, yeah.
Well, I just wanted to circle back to what Sheila was saying about exclusion, because I think that is actually, in my understanding, I think that is what's so incredibly painful right now in the U.S. with the way that the abortion law has changed, and also a lot of the discourse around it, is that it's incredibly clear who's being excluded and who's being valued. And the fact that innocent fetal life, right, is being centered as the most morally important thing to protect, and that grown women with their complicated lives, right, they're being excluded. They're being placed outside of this kind of area of safeguarding, right, to the point where like they're having medical issues that could be dealt with by a simple medical abortion, or not medical in the sense of chemical, but a medical procedure, a reproductive health procedure, and they're not getting it. So I think that's what's really incredibly painful about it. It's not a matter of my rights are being violated, right? That is not what's painful about it. That also is painful, but I think the thing that's really at the underneath it that's really horrifying is that it's really clear that they are not as important, right? Women or people who get pregnant, women are not as important morally according to that legal, those legal changes.
I think when you put that side by side with the far greater millennial inequalities between the sexes, and consider that the discovery of contraception in the middle of the last century did more to equalize the position of the genders than anything else beforehand. So of course, people who are well enough off, well enough educated, they're not usually the ones that are falling victim to unexpected pregnancies. I mean, there's a
Or they can
huge
deal
sort
with
of,
it, yeah.
well, in America in particular, there's a huge class and racial convergence about who is suffering from the unwanted pregnancies and who's falling into your exclusion zone, really. So I think that to say that an emancipatory set of technologies that allowed women a kind of control over their bodies, and therefore, generations of women have now grown up expecting that to be the natural order of things, a part of the natural order of things, and then against that to see the cruel ways in which you're describing the abortion laws operating, that adds a further dimension of exclusionariness, which I think it's pronounced in America because of our historic problems with race and with ethnicity. Probably doesn't hit other societies as much, but it's been quite interesting to us, Ben, Henry, and myself in our observatory project to observe that Latin American countries and profoundly Catholic countries have been liberalizing access to abortion and decision-making, even as America, the US, is restricting and going in the opposite direction.
Mexico, yeah.
We only have 2 minutes left. Whoever haven't speak out would like to have a microphone? Henry? I'm sure. Okay.
I mean,
1 minute, 1 minute.
Okay, I mean, I think something that was kind of interesting, I think was brought up at the beginning was the discussion on suffering and like sentience, and I mean, drawing back to Amy's points on trauma, but I mean, the kind of replaying of those experiences, I think, like highlights a lot of kind of the dynamics of the plasticity of time and the construction of suffering and like where that's actually located. And I mean, so for example, like the memorialization practices in Japan, I mean, those are constructing sort of like a moment in which like what human life is and what's worth remembering and who's in that sort of community are being constructed. And similarly, like with, I mean, matters of trauma experiencing, like abuse and stuff, I mean, I think it also collapses time in a certain way in which those experiences replay and replay. And so I think like investigating like how temporality is, I mean, not just a, list of things, but rather, I mean, re-excavated and can be played with in these political and social settings, I think would be really interesting.
1 minute.
Yes, coming back to the first question that was posed and linking it with some of the work that we have generally been doing, I think in terms of sentience, one aspect that remains under studied and also under discussed even here is if there is a start to sentience, there may potentially be an end. So can you define when sentience ends, because that may help us maybe redefine when it starts, or does it never end? And then if it never ends, then does it have to start?
Time's up, no answer. But thank you so much.
Well, the Buddhists have an easy, they don't talk about origins or the end, right? And so the Buddha refused to answer those questions, just saying those are questions which tend not towards edification, so.
Nirvana is the end? Is that not said anywhere?
I think it's beyond, human conceptualization. That's what so that's why Zen master just say, shut up and sit. Okay. But anyway, thank you so much. But, please do not leave. I think that we'd like to invite the audience. They would like to have a chance to take a picture with our group. It's okay, come on. 你们都上来吧，来跟那个所有的学者，有的人可以坐前面，有的人站后面，好吗？ We just unshakable.
现在法师欢迎大家到台上来。
动作快一点，我们超时了。然后for all our
who wants to join the group photos, please come to the stage. Thank you.
Okay, tonight for the dinner, for our guests. 6:30, please, we meet at the lobby. Are we going to like a bar place? Drink, you guys can have a drink. It's not in the table. And yeah, so, but if some of you don't like it, I also make some reservation, 8 seats, just right next the door. It's just see if you like to enjoy.
Come
Okay.
this way.
有的人坐前面，那个有一些人来那个居士们，赶快坐前面，赶快来快点来。那个议事指的
Come to the front
来坐我前面
to sit on the stage.
来
It would be
快
nice
点
for
快点。
everyone to come on the
这
stage
个这个照相是很特别的
together.
我没有办法再请他们都上来了啊，好吗？快一点，还有吗？好，来再来，再来吗？好，来。This is amazing. OK， 好 ，OK， what should we say? We all say tofu, but cheese. In the United States, get cheese. The smile. OK, well, yeah, sentient. OK, so let's do 1, 2, 3. Sentient. Ready? Okay, thank you so much. Thank you. It's another great day. Yeah, thank you. So we have a third day tomorrow morning, only half day, but it's going to a lot of things going on. Yes, thank you.